Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 231 here, back in Navigatoria, chapter number 27. This chapter is titled Manabu's Answer, and legitimately, whenever I started to sit down and read this chapter, I was like, alright, so it looks like we're heading towards the end of this series, as we probably know we are doing, being that, as we know right now, the series does end in 3 more chapters. On chapter number 30, we actually have, like, a extra, like, chapter in between chapter 29 and chapter 30, but we'll get there whenever I talk about it. Of course, I'm recording these videos a bit late, being like, hey, the series has ended whenever I'm recording this. I think that came across there, but who knows? I'm just very fragmented in what I am thinking right now, I guess. But either way, I sat down and I read this chapter. I'm like, all right, that's pretty interesting. We're getting through and like, okay. And by the end of the chapter, I did not expect the really big twist that comes about. And honestly, it makes a whole lot of sense within the story of Navigatoria, sitting down and being like, hey, this is a natural progression. Hey, only one of these people can become a Navigatoria. And the choice that Manabu makes at the end of this chapter is just a really awesome one, and one that I really think defines his character at a whole. So I really can't complain whatsoever. But really, I just want to talk about this chapter of Navigatoria. Of course, there's like a lot of really interesting things we learn with the whole Project D is that Commander Locke is so anti and against this entire time, and honestly, just a really good chapter of Navigatoria. So before we hop into this chapter of Navigatoria, of course, we need to talk about what happened last time in Navigatoria. We had the whole idea of the 5th Earth Army Admiral and who was the current headmaster of the Navigatoria school. It was Valigo Brunetta, if I'm not mistaken. I did not write his name down, and I probably should have. We see he ends up passing on after some space parasites do some weird things inside of his brain, and he brought parasites to the Navigatoria school and a bunch of other, like, very interesting stuff. We eventually see that Holly Blight ends up becoming the headmaster of the Navigatoria school, something that was, like, very obvious that we knew was really coming at the end of the day, and he pretty much keeps talking about how he's going to pass this Project D. A few characters aren't very happy about that, and the very end of the chapter was really all about Manabu learning about what happened to the first term of students from Navi, as she pretty much explained, like, hey, parasites infected their brains and made them sort of go and fight all each other, like, in wars with each other and all of that various stuff. And the very end of the chapter is both Manabu and Navi being like, hey, whoever wins this Navigatoria election, just know that we are both going to give it our all, right? Live without regrets is like one of the main lines that was said. And the end of the last chapter was really the whole idea of Navi sitting down and just crying over her work, being like, hey, I don't want Manabu to die if I end up becoming the Navigatoria. And that's really what happened last time in Navigatoria. Well, we start off this chapter of Navigatoria in a little bit of a different position, as we see both Manabu and Navi standing outside in the Navigatoria school, and we see that it is snowing here on the planet, and a little bit of like an intro note just says like, hey, the seasons change. As we see Manabu's like, whoa, it's actually snowing here, and he's like, man, I haven't seen snow in a while. I mean, we did used to have a fair bit of snow, like, on my home planet of on my home country of Mujinko, right? And I was like, oh, so are you, like, feeling homesick? And Manabu's like, hey, as if, like, my country wants to kill me if I don't become a Navigatoria here. Like, it's not a good place to be, but he's like, hey, either way, it does make me feel nostalgic a little bit, right? We see that the reason that Manabu and Navi are together is that they are currently heading to one of the various leader meetings, right? Where we see both Christina and Joanne sitting down inside of the, what do you call this place, right? Inside of the room where the leader meetings are held. I don't know why I was like, I guess it's like a briefing room or something. I don't know. I've never had to think about this before, right? But of course, because Christina is from a, like, food nation, pretty much, she has all of these pastries and treats there sitting next to her. And we see that Joanne has taken a few of those and is currently eating a few of them, right? We see that Joanne's just like, hey, there the two of you are, right? She's like, hey, now everybody is present. Manabu comes in and he's just like, man, it's so nice and warm in here. It was just so cold outside. Like, I was shivering to death almost, right? And Joanne passes over some of the snacks and like, hey, have some of these, right? Christine even says, like, hey, Navi, you should help yourself to some of these too. And Navi starts to go and reach for him and grab him, right? And as she's doing this, and as Navi and Manabu are both getting some of this food, Christina just says, like, hey, today appears to be the last leader meeting, right? And she's like, hey, soon they're going to make their decision. At this moment, we see that good old Holly Blight walks into the room. His, like, shoes are just, like, tapping on the ground. It seems like he has, like, tap dance shoes or something. As they're just, like, top, as he's walking. He's like, hey, to be chosen as Navigatoria, you need to be 1, amongst the top 10 overall scores, and 2, on top of that, you need to come first place in the Earth Army ballots. So there is about 1 month until the last and most important intelligence and fitness test before those ballots, right? And we see that Holly pretty much just like walked in and said all this to where like everybody's like, oh, there's the new chairman. He sort of just like walked in and did all this out of nowhere, right? And then Holly says, and that is when we will put Plan D into action. And of course, Manabu's like, hey, Plan D? Like, what are you talking about, right? And Holly just says like, oh, Plan D, the democracy plan, proposes that not just the Earth Army will vote to decide in Navigatoria, but that the Dimensions will also be able to vote alongside the Earth Army soldiers. And this comes as a shock to literally everybody. They're like, whoa, this is actually a little bit crazy, right? As a little bit of narration just says like, hey, the Earth Army consists of 30,000 people, while the Dimension population consists of 3.2 million, right? As Holly Blight just says like, hey, those who get ruled over get to choose their leader. That would only be fair, wouldn't you think? And this really goes to show, like, it really makes sense why Vigo Brunetta did not like this idea, because he did not like the Minthians. He did not like them at all. He thought they were, like, useless species, pretty much. So the whole reason that he wanted to kill Holly is, like, yes, you want to put Project D into action, when, of course, he would not like that plan whatsoever. It does go to make, like, a whole lot of sense in my mind, at least, right? And Manabu is just sort of like sitting here like, wow, that would mean that if Navi was among the final 10, then she would surely be chosen as a Navigatoria, right? And Joanne even says like, hey, I mean, we didn't hear about any of this, right? And Holly's like, yes. Opinions vary even among the Earth Army, and it was only recently decided upon, right? And Christina's like, oh, so it would sort of be rigged in Navi's favor, just as all of the rumors were pretty much saying, right? And Holly's just like, I mean, yeah, it does really seem that way. However, the Earth Army will ensure a minimum amount of fairness. That means that all you have a chance to, as long as Navi doesn't rank among the top 10, right? As all of the other various people just say like, oh wow, so my goal isn't to win the election, but making it to the top 10 instead. And as Holly says this, sort of everybody looks over to Navi. Navi thinks like, oh wow, so my goal isn't then to win the election, it's just to make it within the top 10 of everybody, right? We see that we now cut outside the leader meeting where everybody's sort of like going their own separate ways. We really see that Navi has gone off on her own, and that Christina, Joanne, and Manabu are all sort of like hanging out together in the moment, right? Joanne pretty much just says like, hey, I was very sure like the Earth Army was planning something, but like to make Navi to Navigatoria from the very beginning, like that's just crazy of them, right? Christina's like, hey, especially since that it seems that that's the new chairman's intention to begin with, right? Manabu then just says like, hey, so is this what Master Kirin told me about? As he remembers back to whenever we got that chapter, what was it, chapter number 23, all about like Kirin and his final day, whenever Kirin was like, hey, the Earth Army is up to something, look out for the 101st student, right? But either way, Manabu is like, hey guys, but we still have a chance. Like you guys said last month, we just need to stop Navi from reaching the top ranks, right? As all of them are sort of just thinking like, hey, Navi's grades have been slipping as of late, right? And we see that Manabu starts to get a little bit of like a concerned look on his face. He's like, hey, no, I can't worry about Navi. I need to win no matter what. And he's like, hey, in 1 month's time, our relationship will mean nothing. Which is like, damn, like that's such a hard thing to be like, yeah, no matter what happens here, even if you were friends, not everybody can be friends at the end of the day, like this country that Manabu wants to make, and like this planet and united sort of force that Manabu believes in. Yeah, these relationships, once this school is over and somebody wins and others don't, it really won't matter a thing, which is like, oh my gosh, it's so sad and emotional, like truly, right? Well, we cut to 1 month later at this point, as you see that all of the final grades have been posted on the bulletin board or whatever you call it, right? As we pretty much see like all of the overall grades, we pretty much understand who got all of the top 10 places. It's like, hey, first place went to Christina, of course, the leader of Class B. We wouldn't expect anything else. Second place went to William. Third place, Raphael. Two students who we necessarily don't particularly know. Fourth place to Manabu, and fifth place to Joanne. All right, we know those guys, right? Sixth place, Bernard. Seventh place, Luis. Eighth place, Stefano. Ninth place, Carolina. 12th replace Navi. And we see that Navi is looking like all despondent in this moment. I think that we knew a few of these characters, like they were mentioned a few times, like, hey, William, Raphael, Bernard, Luis, Stefano, Carolina. Like, I think all of these people got, like, referenced a few times, but, like, never, like, where they were a big part of the story. I'm pretty sure we've heard the William name before. It's like, yes, this was somebody who was very smart this entire series, right? And then we see in 10th place comes Aiden, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. Aiden actually got in. Like, I'm really happy to see, like, Aiden did so good, but, like, it's honestly a little surprising that also Rigotan didn't make it in. We don't necessarily know where he is, right? And he's like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. We see that also Madeline got 14th place, and she comes over to Manabu, and she's like, oh, congratulations, Mr. Manabu, and sort of like just goes and like hugs his arm, and Manabu's like, oh, whoa, what are you doing here? We actually get a panel of Rigotan as he's very despondent, just standing here like, oh man, like, that sort of sucks, right? We see that Peppino, one of the various Earth Army people, just is like, hey, now then, if all of you top 10 students would come over here, right? And we see the 11th place scorer, whose name is Emilia, is like, hey, hold on. Is it already decided? Like, I worked all hard all year, and, like, I got 11th place, right? And Peppino's like, yes, it's only those top 10 students. Like, I'm really sorry. And, like, hey, as long as no one steps down. But in this moment, we see that Christina raises her hand. She's like, hey, excuse me, I will be stepping down. And we see that Emilia's like, oh, hey, are you so sure about that? And Christina just pretty much just says like, hey, I never had any interest in becoming a Navigatoria in the first place. In fact, I actually quite have a distaste for my nation's royal family. My goal is to disappoint them in this very critical moment. She's like, oh, such a refreshing feeling, right? And it's like, that is, like, extremely harsh in the moment of being like, yes, I made it all the way to the top. I was so close. I was the top #1 scorer. And then it's like, hey, yeah, I'm stepping down because I hate my family. It's like, wow, that's, like, that's incredible. And, like, Christina, you have a lot more of, like, a higher, okay, you're pretty interesting in my book, right? And we see that, of course, Navi is like, hey, even if I move up 1, I'm still in 11th. Like, it's still not enough. But maybe this was for the best. If I were to become a Navigatoria, Manabu would die. And Manabu sees Navi crying despondently on the ground, and he thinks back to all of the times that he shared with not only Hina, but also Navi, as he remembers, like, whenever him and Hina were staying together, and like, hey, we may be separated for now, but someday I'll come and get you. He remembers all these times that he spent with Navi when she just, like, needed him very much and, like, all of those various things, right? And we just get a look at Hina's face and, like, hey, you absolutely have to become a Navigatoria, okay? Once you do, we can be together forever. And Manabu's just like, I. As we see Manabu raise up his hand in this moment, and he just says, like, hey, I'm gonna step down too. He's like, hey, I'll pass my spot over to Navi. And we see that Navi is just like, what are you doing? Madeline is looking despondent as can be, and even Aiden's like, oh, what, Manabu, like, what are you doing here, right? As we just hear a few words just saying like, hey, that's what I like about you, Manabu, which is, of course, something that Hina said to him long, long ago. But Aiden comes over and grabs Manabu's shoulder and just like, hey, but Manabu, but you said you'd make one, a nation where everybody can smile and be friends. And Manabu's like, yeah, that doesn't have to be me. And he just walked over to Navi and says like, hey, Navi, please do it in my place. And he pretty much, like, reaches out his hand, Navi takes it, and Manabu just, like, shakes it and starts to walk away. And a lot of these people are just like, oh, like, what in the world? Like, we see Peppino just is like, hey, then if the rest of the students not chosen in top 10, because please return to all of their dorms, please. We see that Madeline is just, like, crying, like, Sir Manabu, like, take that back, like, please. And she starts to think, like, hey, what should I do? Sir Manabu is going to be executed, right? As all of these various people are just like, what is going on here? Like, this is crazy. And we see Gray Goodman, the class leader of Class D, is just like, Manabu. As we see that Manabu is just walking away from this entire situation, he just thinks like, hey, this is really for the best. And as he's walking through the halls, we see that none other than Hakutaku comes up next to him. He's like, oh, hey, Manabu, right? And Momo's like, hey, Master Hakutaku. And he's like, hey, I'm so sorry. Like, you even supervised my studies. Like, I really can't apologize to you enough. As Hakutaku just walks up and grabs out an electric baton, puts it into Manabu's chest, and pretty much electrocutes Manabu as Manabu starts to fall to the ground. His glasses also fall down, and Hakutaku sort of like catches him in his arms, just like, hey, you don't need to apologize, Manabu. You're just going to be executed. As that is where we end the chapters with the words, farewell, Manabu. And like, man, such an interesting chapter of this series. Like, it makes so much sense for what Manabu did here. I mean, this is legitimately, like I said, this is what Manabu would do in this moment. Raise his hand and step out of the election himself. Like, it really just makes too much sense for his character. I'm honestly a little bit sad, like, I didn't call this going forward. And, like, it seems like now Navi will end up winning the election. And it seems like I don't think Manabu is actively going to die here. I think that Manabu is going to make it out to a happier place at the end of the day. Like, he is going to come in and save him, or all of his friends are going to also, like, be like, hey, we want to make Manabu we want to make sure that Manabu lives, pretty much, right? How that is going to happen, I honestly don't have any clue. It's pretty interesting that, like, hey, going through this chapter, what project he actually was, good old Project Democracy, and hey, it makes a lot of sense, like, hey, if we're going to have this Navigatoria vote on who leads this planet, it doesn't make sense that only the 30,000 Earth Army guys get to really do it. Like, why not let the 1.2 or the 3.2 million Dimensions, like, also get a say in this? Which is like, hey, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like if Manabu was still in the running, like, he would have a shot. I mean, he rallied a bunch of Dimensions under him. So it really just does come and make sense at the end of the day. Yeah, this just made way too much sense. That's all I'm saying. Like, Hakutaku coming in and, like, stabbing the electric baton and saying, like, hey, you're going to be executed now. And Manabu, like, what do I do? Like, I'm just interested to see what happens next. And it's really just as simple as that. And with all that out of the way, thank you guys so very much for watching this video on Navigatoria, chapter number 27. Again, this is titled Manabu's Answer. The answer to give it all up and give it all away, pretty much. Which, at the end of the day, is a very sweet and nice sentiment. I've got plenty of our Navigatoria chapter reviews up on the channel. I've been recovering this series since, like, chapter 20. Again, this series is pretty much ending here. Of course, we know that we have 4 chapters left for me to cover after this one. So don't be expecting too many more of these videos. Expect them, like, every 3 to 4 days or so. It seems like that's a schedule that's going to be working best for me getting these videos out. But either way, thank you guys so very much for watching these videos again on Navigatoria chapter number 27, titled Manabu's Answer. And yeah, I'll catch you guys next time for chapter number 28 of Navigatoria. Again, this is chapter number 27, and what a great chapter it was. I'll catch you guys next time. This will be Glowplasma 231, signing out.